morning, everybody. I'm Christine Jacobs. I'm the Executive Director of Represent PA. We are the PAC for supporting Democratic women running for state representative and state senator in the state of Pennsylvania. Our goal is to flip the legislature blue with strong progressive women who are going to lead the way. And I love the fact that we've been able to bring in so many our current electeds. As we've added more women, I keep getting calls saying send more, because they're all out to make a difference. They're all out, like you'll hear from Deb and Lissa today, they're all out to make a difference. And as I've said many times, some people run for office to be somebody. Hey, you know, I'm an elected representative, I get a pension, I get this. And some people run for office to do something. And clearly the people that we've been electing want to do something and they want to make a difference. Many of you may have attended the call we had last week where we talked a lot about what are the issues in Pennsylvania, what are all the ways that our current legislature is absolutely failing us, and in terms of kinds of issues like water and generally the environment and the quality of our education statewide and the quality and access of healthcare in this state. And there's so many ways, and they all boil down to equity. They all boil down to if you have enough money and you have enough power, you can get whatever you need. But so many people in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania don't have it. And that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that our values are discussed, and these are values discussions, and we want to elect people who are consistent with our values. And that's the purpose of these calls that we have. So yes, we're talking about hitting the campaign trail again. And with what these women and some of our other past candidates have been through, it's astonishing to me that they want to keep at it. But I guess they understand what they did and what they want to do differently and what kind of different support they have. And so we're thrilled to be able to make this presentation for you today. Our agenda today, well, I'm going to introduce our guests. We're going to talk about what it's going to take to win in 2022. And that goes into redistricting. As you listen to them talk, you're going to be hearing a lot about messaging and the importance of what are the messages that get through to voters. And we're going to talk about the amount of money it takes to win an election. And then, of course, we'll talk briefly about the role of Represent PA in this whole process. Deb Ciamacca, I actually met years ago because she taught two of my three kids at Conestoga High School. She served in the Marine Corps, and watching her social media post this week has been quite touching because she has family in the Marines, and a lot of the activities in Afghanistan have hit her personally. A reflection on 2020. She lost by less than 1,000 votes in 2020 and to an incumbent, and her race cost over $1 million. So this is why we have to continue to support her and to support her early. Lissa Geiger-Shulman is another graduate of the Pennsylvania college education system. She was a teacher, and then she moved in to be chief of staff to a state rep. She only lost by 4,000 votes in her district, and her raise was close to $1 million. So again, these are very expensive races, but they were winnable, and we're just going to see what happens with the districts. So where are the 2022 candidates that we want to support for next year's election? Many of them are waiting for completed district maps. We've talked a lot about gerrymandering and the redrawing of the districts in past events, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to but if you want to follow progress more deeply, make sure you're following Fair Districts PA on social media, because they have constant discussion about what's going on. The good news this week is you probably remember that we have our committee who are looking at redistricting and who are in charge of it in the state. Consists of the Democrat and Republican leads in both the House and in the Senate, and then one person who's was named by the state Supreme Court, and he is former provost at Pitt. One of the things that Joanna McClinton, who's the House Democratic lead, who's we've been a longtime supporter of hers, she really worked hard on the whole system of prison gerrymandering. You may have seen something about it. There are 58,000 prisoners in the state system, 58,000. And they're counted traditionally in Pennsylvania. They've been counted in the location of the prison. Where are the prisons? The prisons are mostly in the central part of the state, and yet many of the prisoners are from outside those areas. If one of the prisoners has an issue that requires discussion with the state rep, he doesn't call the state rep from wherever the prison's located. He'll count his home state rep because that's a person he can relate to. When he gets out of prison, that's where he'll be going back to. And so it makes sense. It's practical in terms of support. In most states, that's the case, but not Pennsylvania. So Joanna presented a long document, a lot of data, a lot of legal documents about why prison gerrymandering is bad. And the committee approved her proposal. And so it will look at move people to their home districts as opposed to counting them in the location of the prison. For Philadelphia, for example, that's 9,000 more residents of Philadelphia who will count. The districts are, as I said, the districts are developed by this redistricting team, but they are really looking at, there will be an appeals process. So it's going to be a long process. They expect by the end of the year to have them basically drawn, but it's ongoing. And Joanna has told us that she is really looking at compact districts, none of this sneaking around kind of to try and pick up a few more seats. What she wants to do is present something that looks fair, not dividing up townships, not dividing counties as little as possible in order to minimize the comments by the Republicans that she made it unfair. But so many of our candidates are not going to declare that they're running until they know what the district looks like, which makes perfect sense. So right now I'd like to introduce our two special guests and talk about what it's like. I'd heard that they're both hit the trail already, and on listening tours and trying to figure out what's going on in their districts. And so with that, I give it over to Lissa and to Deb.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Chris, for having us here today. Lissa, do you want to start it off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lissa Geiger Shulman. I think we're here to talk a little bit about what it was like, immediately post-election, kind of what happens after you lose, and then roll into some of the activities that we've been doing over the last several months. Yeah, so I think initially just right after losing, there's still a lot of stuff for folks on here who are familiar with campaigns that are campaign close up and really self-care, taking some time to check in with yourself. If folks are familiar, I have 3 young kids and a husband who's an emergency room physician. So there was a lot of family self-care that needed to happen, and that hadn't happened for a lot of 2020. I joke I got a hat and glasses that I wore around my district too for a little while, just to really take some time to truly check out. But that didn't last. So we'll roll into that next. Do you want to say some?
Yeah, I just want to say, no one can replicate the feeling of what it's like to lose. But I don't think any of us anticipated, actually winning either. You don't really guarantee that you're going to win this whole thing. So, a lot of people asked me how I felt right after the election, and I think it was a time for reflection. And what I didn't want to do was just immediately dive into something. I wanted to really sit back and reflect on what had happened and talk to as many people as I could. And I'm talking about experts, non-experts, people who had witnessed the campaign. And as Lissa said, reconnect with my family who really had not spent any time with for many, many weeks.
Yeah, so after talking with a lot of folks and getting their sense of kind of what had happened, and some groups that dove right into some post-analysis and some groups that were just really taking their time, there was a lot of time, especially during those winter months, December, January, February. We had a ton of snow out here, but to read and reflect and try to think about, what's the future. For me, it was about not for me, but for our Democratic Party. Of course, we had the January 6th insurrection, which, continued to make clear that we need to stay active as Democrats. And so I can say I particularly focused in a lot around the race class narrative work. So Ian Haney Lopez's work, Heather McGee, both kind of, Heather specifically writes a lot about policy and work around the way that race continues to influence public policy today. So those were where I focused. Laura Putnam, who's local to me, an excellent researcher, writer about grassroots organizations, both related to the Black Lives Matter movement, but a whole variety of grassroots entities that have been active, especially since 2016.
Just to highlight a couple of things that Lissa talked about. One of the things I really looked at when I was reading was how do we beat this Fox News, conservative kind of messaging system. And one of the things Laura Putnam says, and one of the things that this book, if you want to read a great book, Politics is for Power, which talks about building our Democratic Party from the grassroots up. I think it's really going to be person to person, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But and also, some of the things that I did that kind of echo that same sentiment is I talked to a group in West Virginia called West Virginia Can't Wait, who are trying to set up a parallel democratic system to fight, really, honestly, the Joe Manchin Democrats in West Virginia, by really using people power and people who felt disenfranchised for years to get them involved in the Democratic Party. And so if I can say anything to you, I know Rachel Maddow has re-upped for another few years, but just yelling at the TV screen at Rachel and commiserating with her is not the way we're going to change this Democratic Party. It's really by getting the people who have not been involved and putting them on our team, I guess.
So a couple of things that I started to get involved with kind of in the earlier part of this year. These are some photos from in 2020, of course, and I have a very close campaign supporter and committee woman in my municipality who told me many, many times over the course of my campaign, you going to that Black Lives Matter protest, that really hurt you. She said it over and over and over. And it's really challenging personally, because obviously, for one, I believe Black Lives Matter and I believe in the movement and the demands that they're making. But working for, I know we have folks all over the state and maybe even outside who, if you're familiar with Allegheny County, it is a very white county. Our Pittsburgh metro area is whiter than the typical metro of this size. So it's challenging. And as we've seen Fox News use critical race theory as the newest dog whistle, it's calmed down a little bit, but for a good chunk of this year, a lot of the school board candidates that I've been working with were really struggling with that boogeyman that, the right-wing nut jobs have effectively deployed. So really helping to dig in, obviously using the research and the reading I talked about to help my local school board candidates in one school district that's within the old HD 30. The guy has been on Fox and Friends talking about how racism is pervading his school district because they passed a resolution last year in 2020. And so really helping the candidate running against him and others to talk about what needs to happen in education, what's best practices as a former teacher who understands the need for diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, those types of work, whether it's in teacher training or curriculum work. And how do we message around this without continuing to inflate the CRT hubbub that the right wing is wanting us to?
Like Lissa, I'm staying involved in my local area. And one of the first things that happened, and if you know Delaware County, this district that I'm trying to flip is Newtown Square media area. And one of the first things the Republicans did up there in a very, it's all Republican supervisors board up there, is we had one drop box in Newtown Square, and they ripped it out of the cement within a couple of weeks of the November election. And so I knew this, not just for political reasons, was something I wanted to get involved in. So myself and two of the Democratic supervisor candidates up there put together a rally to put the drop box back into the cement. And I think the biggest thing we did was we energized Republicans who we texted all of them and said, did you know that your local drop box was ripped out of the ground? Something we spent a lot of money to put in here, and why would they do that? And our supervisor board was besieged with phone calls. And guess what? They put the box back in. So it's a win for democracy here. And I think, you know what? If we call them out on some of the, not only obnoxious, but anti-democratic behavior that they're executing, then I think that's going to help all of us. We can't stand back. And, I was supportive. Mary Gay Scanlon came down. And I think this is an example of, me as a state candidate, working with a federal candidate, working with the local candidates, and working together with the local Democratic Party, got this box back in. Another thing that we're doing here in this area is, and this is to this Politics is for Power book, which I highly recommend. It's written by a guy by the name of Eitan Hirsch out of Tufts, is to really get, roll up your sleeves and get the neighborhood leaders involved. And so what we've been doing is identifying people who are already volunteers and also people who are super Dems who've never really gotten involved in the neighborhoods. And we've created this thing called Democracy in a Box, working with one of the local indivisible groups. And we are trying to get in every precinct neighborhood leaders who are going to be the ones who talk to their local Democrats, so that when something comes out like CRT, we have someone on the ground who can say, wait a minute, this is crap, right? This is something that you should not be listening to. And, we're in the baby steps of doing this. We've done this in 4 or 5 different neighborhoods right now. We're in the midst of expanding it. But I think it's a great example of what a candidate should be doing in between cycles, so that next year, when I'm trying to run, or when Lissa's trying to run, we've already got people on the ground who are energized and are people on the ground to get things going.
And so my version of that neighborhood leaders is an entity called Democratic Partners of Allegheny County. So if folks are familiar with the county committee structure, particularly in Allegheny County, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of things that are broken. We have an archaic endorsements, in my opinion, endorsement system that's awful. And it's particularly awful for women. If you look at who the elected and appointed committee folks, who often are those who already have political connections, who they endorsed in 2020, and every chance that they had to endorse a woman, they endorsed a man over a woman if they could. In one particular case where there were only 2 women, they endorsed the vocal Trump supporting woman. So our Democratic committee is not full of Democrats, and that's really a problem here in Allegheny County. So trying to get folks to understand what a committee person does, which is a lot of what Deb just described, being that on the ground person, that trusted person who can combat the narratives that are on Fox News or the local issues that people are concerned about, and really trying to recruit folks to run for committee, to fill seats where they're empty. In one of the largest municipalities in my House district, where my opponent in 2020 is from, their chair is a former elected official who was terminally ill, didn't call meetings throughout my entire campaign. And yet there was a whole grassroots group that was energized and wanted to do the work of the committee, but rather than embracing them, continued to hold on to that semblance of power, that, visage. So really making sure that the folks who are actually doing the work are there and on the ground is a big part of what DPAC is doing.
In between cycles, I think one of the things I learned from, there's a thing called the Barbara Lee Foundation. She's a congresswoman, and Celinda Lake, who's a pollster for President Biden, pointed this out. There are certain things that women are expected to do and certain things that women can really help themselves by doing, by getting involved in. And so, believe it or not, most people don't think women candidates are viable unless they have some kind of economic background. And I was lucky enough, mainly because we flipped the Delaware County Council from red to blue, to be appointed to the Delaware County Economic Redevelopment Board. So I've been involved in that. And in media, I've been helping to organize an affordable housing group to counter the extraordinary rents and lack of housing that we have in this area. And one thing I encourage all candidates to do, and I'm sure Luke has done some of this too, is to write editorials for your local newspaper. Local newspapers are in such trouble that I've already written 10 editorials over the last year for our local newspaper, just to not only get my name out there, but have a platform to talk about what's going on in the county and at the national level. Let's check this off, but one thing that we're both doing is doing a deep listening tour or deep canvassing in conjunction with Change PA and every district.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier in sort of that reflection period, one of the first groups to reach out to me probably within a week after the primary, or after the general in November, was Change PA, to say, we want to interview all the candidates. They've made significant investments similar to Represent PA, and in the hopes of flipping some seats and having so many losses. They were really interested in a candidate and staff. I think my campaign manager even was on our sort of debrief, or helped answer some questions around what did you do and where did we miss? And we really honed in, I think, on two issues. I mean, there's a lot and there's a whole report, of course, you can read, but for this listening tour, really honed in on the idea of who are we targeting, particularly when it comes to persuasion and trying to persuade voters. And then, so are we targeting the right people? And then what messages are we using with those folks? Are we using things that actually convince them to vote for us versus just a more generic message that doesn't resonate? So in working with every district, they've helped produce these lists of what we think are persuadable voters. So I focused for most of this summer on the Trump Democrats. And I think what was really fascinating to me was just how willing folks were to talk and be heard when I wasn't presenting as, I'm here to tell you about a candidate, or, as I did in 2020, I'm Lissa, I'm running for state house, I'm a former teacher and I care about education. Do you have any questions? I got no questions, none, even from the folks with the Blue Lives Matter or we support our police signs in their lawns. They didn't want to ask me about that topic. They already had their mind made up, or my introduction wasn't, getting to the crux of perhaps what they may have been concerned about. Whereas on this tour of just saying, I ran for state house, but I didn't get to talk to people because of the pandemic. I'm interested, where do you feel government isn't listening to you? That introduction has really led to some very long 20, 30, 40, 50-minute conversations about the issues that they have with government and public policy right now.
Yeah, I've got to echo Lissa. This has been a game changer for me, because in a way, this is a way to talk to people, and in the end, a way to change people's minds without actually trying to sell anything. I've had the best conversations that I've had in politics, knocking on doors the last few months. And believe me, not all of them have been great, but I have learned so very much. And I think this is a completely different frame of way to present yourself, as Lissa said, and just being very open to people And in a way, you're very vulnerable because you're not presenting yourself as someone who has all the answers. You're listening to people who are frustrated about half the time. I don't agree with them. I was talking to people who are almost exclusively Republicans and independents. But I think that by doing this, I think we both have earned a lot of respect with people just being out there and doing this. So we've had some great conversations. So we don't purport, I think, to have all the answers. We're in the midst of doing this right now. I think we have maybe 350 to 400 conversations between the two of us and some other people that we now have out doing this. But I think we have learned some about what people are concerned about. Talking to Biden Republicans, by the way, the way they micro-targeted this is that mainly we're talking to, at least I'm talking to college-educated Republicans and independents. And I just got to say, last year I went out there talking about common sense gun reform because that was the real reason that I went out and decided to run. But I have not heard that once, not once on the trail. And what I have heard, I've heard a lot. I will tell you the number one reason that people did not vote for Trump and voted for Biden was the chaos and polarization and, just not waking up the next day and not knowing what Trump was going to do. I think the people that I'm talking to, this is what they wanted to stop. And so I have had some great conversations with these people. And secondarily, I would say they're looking at bread and butter issues. A lot of people said, I voted for Biden, but I hope my taxes aren't going to go up. I hope that, the inflation's not going to overtake my earnings. So I have heard some rumblings there recently. But I would say that those are kind of two of the frames that I've heard initially. Maybe Lissa can talk a little bit more about some of the other things she's heard.
Yeah, definitely. So the Trump Democrats I've been targeting are non-college educated white men and older. They skew a little bit older as well. So it's interesting. They break down the folks I've talked to about still close to 50-50 in terms of whether they voted Biden or Trump. And then there's a chunk of folks who that election doesn't necessarily come up in conversation. A lot of union folks, a lot of, if not union, very manual labor type retirees that I've spoken with. And a lot of them say things like, the Democratic Party, I registered that way 40, 50 years ago. I wouldn't do that today. I haven't registered or I haven't voted Democrat in many years. That used to be the party of law and order. And really have a lot of, even if they didn't vote Trump because they like Biden, they like his experience, he's been around, they trust him. There's a lot of underlying what I would call racial anxiety that comes up, even to the point where for 10 minutes, we have a great conversation. Maybe they remember me, we talk about education in schools. We seem pretty aligned on an issue or taxes or local development or stormwater type issue. But at the end, I say, anything else on your mind? And they'll raise something like, I can't go into the city anymore. Or, you wouldn't be safe driving in a Black neighborhood. It's very concerning because you can see how some of the dog whistling that the right is using could, if it hasn't already, win those voters over. So that's really been interesting to me. I've switched in the last couple of weeks to speaking with those college-educated Republicans and independents that Deb mentioned. And so a lot of what she shared is really very similar in my area.
But I did want to add one thing here too. I've actually gotten some criticism, not a lot, from Democrats saying, why the hell are you out there talking to, Republicans? You know what I mean? Why don't you just energize, the base? And why are you doing these conversations? And I just got to say, first of all, I'm in a purple district, right? And so Biden won my district by 13 points and I lost by 800 and something points. So something happened here. Why do people vote for Biden but not vote for me? So I've got to understand people or I'm not going to win. I mean, and we're not going to flip the legislature if we don't understand people who did this. And, you know, to the last point here, how listening is a powerful tool and empathy can conquer partisanship. I still believe that some of these people are going to flip and eventually, maybe they're not going to become Democrats, but they're going to become independents. And if I could tell just a quick story, I'll just give you an example of one person I talked to. I knocked on a door, Republican woman in her 60s. And the first thing she said to me is, "What party are you?" And I said, "You know, I'm a Democrat." And she said, "Well, you don't want to talk to me. I voted for Trump." And I said, "No, I really do want to talk to you. I want to understand, you know, why you voted for Trump. And I'd love to hear you." And she talked for 20 minutes about every Fox News, you know, trope that you've ever heard, everything from critical race theory to, you know, the coronavirus is being brought in by, you know, illegal aliens that Biden's letting in at the border. And then at the end of this, she said to me, "You may wonder why I'm so angry." And I said, I really do wonder why you're so angry. And she said, "I'm angry because I lost both my kids to opioids. They're both dead." And, you know, it's obviously a powerful moment. And I couldn't believe she shared it with me. And I said to her, like, you know, I'm so sorry. In my own family, I have experienced the same thing. I mean, I've got a niece and nephew who are both right now struggling with opioids. And we had the best talk for another 20 minutes. And she thanked me profusely for coming to her door and talking to her. And I think, you know, to the point, I know Trump was always transactional and, you know, wanted to, you know, everything was about getting a vote from somebody. I think people are tired of this transactional relationship and just basically going to the door and asking for something. I think they want to be heard. And so in this case, I think that's the beauty of this listening tour, is that we are changing people's minds simply by standing there and listening to what they have to say. So I don't know if you want to take this, Lissa, since I've been talking a lot here.
Sure, although your next steps might be a little more concrete than mine. Mine kind of stop with what are the maps, you know, based on where I live.
Sure, yeah.
Geographically, you know, I could be drawn into a lot of different kinds of districts. So that's kind of the big outstanding question for me. Is what will House District 30 look like? I mean, the other big question for me too is there's some rumor my former opponent will be running for state Senate, which is very concerning. That would be against another endorsed candidate from a few years ago, Senator Lindsey Williams. So depending what she decides and whether she runs for both seats will determine quite a bit about my next steps.
But to Lissa's point, I mean, a lot of us are on hold. A lot of people are on hold because we don't know what the maps are going to be. I'm sort of taking a flyer here, and I am saying that I'm running right now. I'm praying that my district will be fairly similar to what I have right now. It is gerrymandered. I'm hoping that if it gets slightly not gerrymandered, that I will have a better chance of winning. But I'm going out there, you know, back on the trail, raising money. I'm just interviewing people for staff, and you know, pretty soon we're going to be taking this information that we've learned, and we're going to be going out there and testing the messaging that we've heard at the doors. And I'm back talking to my volunteers and try to get them energized for next year. So, but I will say, I think we don't want pats on the back for this, but we are doing this really not knowing what's going to happen in our own districts. And we're hoping that what we can do is help all the other candidates who are thinking about running next year by having been out there, hearing what's going on, and then using this information to craft new messages.
Yeah, I think sort of the classic, I mean, not to since this is a representative event, I'll say, I think women, when they lose, tend to figure out, well, how can I use what I've learned, right, to help others to continue the movement, whether it's to help the next candidate. We've seen that in a lot of districts where you have women running after other women. Like, if I'm not going to run, how do I recruit somebody who shares my values, who has a good background and chance of winning, and dump all the information from this listening tour, as well as everything from 2020 about being a candidate into them, so that they're a stronger candidate for next time. I think this is just an opportunity, if folks do want to stay in touch with either of us, to hear the latest on campaign announcements or what our next steps are. There's some signups on both of those, and I know Deb's been sending, and I'm hopefully drafting very soon an update around the listening tour and the lessons learned. So if you want to stay in touch, you can sign up on either of those websites. And then I think we're ready for the next slide. We can drop those in the chat too.
Okay, I have, one of the questions I think that came up that I think is significant is, so Trevor Sutherland at a previous event talked a lot about deep canvassing, and you're talking about your listening tour. Do you see, I know Deb has, I don't know, Lissa, have you talked to Trevor?
No.
Well, I will make sure you do, but could you comment on what the difference, do you see a difference between your listening tour and what Trevor's doing in terms of deep canvassing?
I think you're looking at different targets for one thing, Chris, and for example, I think they're looking at more disaffected Democrats that they want to get out there. And I also think that they're testing messaging, or they're testing issues, I should say. So they're looking at certain issues. I can't speak to all the issues that they're talking about, but I think, for example, healthcare and education might be two of them. And then I think they're actually going to be in my district. So I'll have both a deep listening and this deep canvassing going on at the same time in my district. So, what the good news is that people know we're out there. I mean, even though I'm technically not trying to change minds, I am handing out a business card that says, Deb Ciamacca on it for state representatives. So, we're definitely getting our people out there and talking to voters at the door.
I love that we've already had a couple people write in the chat that they're looking at running in the next year. I'm sure it depends on what the districts look like, but we look forward to hearing from you when you do declare, when the districts are known. And oh, guess what? Now we're going to get into what represents role in the whole thing. We don't recruit candidates. We don't go looking for them. We're friends with groups like Emerge, which trains women running for office. We keep track of what's going on. And a lot of the women that we've supported or people know who we are. In 2014 or so, we had to go look for candidates and tell them, we want to give you money, really. But we had less money to give. By 2018, and then clearly in 2020, people knew who we were. And so we started to hear from candidates all over the state. As I said earlier, we invest. We don't recruit. We invest in women running for the state house and the state senate across PA. In 2020, we invested $500,000 in 45 general election candidates and 8 Senate candidates. The amounts range from maybe $3,000 to $20-something thousand, depending on the race and the need. We are not anyone's largest donor by far, but candidates know to contact us early. Candidates like Maria Collette, who's a state senator who's running for re-election in 2022. She was, get this one, she was thought by a lot of the politicos in 2018 that she was a nice person running, but she probably didn't have a chance. Going back to the comment I put in the chat though, women have a chance when you give them a chance. And turns out Maria Collette was an attorney who didn't like being an attorney. She went to nursing school. She ended up working her way up, and she was director of a lot of operations at the retirement communities. And then she decided to run for office. I keep teasing her. I hope she's not going to go off to a new career next. But we gave her first $8,000. It was her first check of over $1,000 in her campaign in 2018. She turned that $8,000 into much more money by doing 2.5 mailings out to her constituents. And then she was able to go back to the Senate campaign committee and say, I have $100,000 now. Now are you going to pay attention to me? And that's where we are. I also threw into the chat the comment that Jess Benham was a person that Lissa Geiger Shulman was referring to earlier, in that the Allegheny County Dems, who we know well and we do not think highly of, put up a woman Trumpy as their candidate. And in general, Represent does not pick horses. For example, sorry, Deb Ciamacca, we didn't support Deb in her primary. She was running against another very well-qualified woman. But once Deb cleared the primary, then we were all in to support her. In the primary where Jess Benham was running, she was running against a woman who was not consistent with our values. And so we picked her to run in that race. So as I said, we're no one's largest donor, but we're an early donor, and we provide a network of women to talk to each other. Investments will be concentrated on those races where we can work the hardest and we can give candidates the best chance. But where are we so far in this cycle? We're in the 2022 cycle, and we only have 125,000 or so towards our $500,000 investment goal. And that money is going to be needed by a year from now in order to be most effective. Candidates know that giving them money in October is nice, but not very effective. They need the money sooner rather than later. We want to pay for more listening tours. We want to pay for more materials to be left early on in the listening tours. We have several of our candidates who are running in 2022 for re-election who are heavily targeted. I mentioned, I didn't mention, but one of the candidates we supported in 2018 was Senator Katie Muth. Katie is a very, very outspoken person in the Senate. I personally think that's needed. She's very much involved, for example, and she got herself placed on the committee that's PSERS, which is looking at the retirement funds for Pennsylvanians. And the money was not invested well, and the people who were running that were not completely open and honest about how they were investing money. We love that Katie Muth is on that because she's holding people to account. She's a target. There's going to be a lot of money coming in from out of state to try and defeat Katie Muth. So these are the kind of people that we need, and there's certain of our House members who we know also are being targeted. We need money by the end of this year for incumbent protection. We want to start scaring off outside candidates. If they see that a Katie Muth has significant funds in 2021, they're less likely to decide to primary her. Do you know there were 444 people, count them, 444 people who gave to us in 2020, but have not yet given to us in 2021. Please give to us. There are many donors who gave, we used $1,200 as a target, that if you give us more than $1,200, you can be involved in our endorsement process. If you give us the $1,200, invest with us by the end of this year to support primary candidates, you'll be eligible for our early 2022 trainings. So you'll be able to work with us on how we're going to decide how to invest early money next year. And 234 people have been, like many of you, they've attended our briefings that have not yet given in 2021. Again, we use these briefings to make sure you understand it's not just our strong feminist tendencies that say these are the people we want to endorse. It's because these are people who are consistent with our values. There are people who want our candidates, or people who want to make a change, who understand the inequities in this state and want to make a change. I was talking with somebody yesterday who's a great example of, I think, the reach of our work. She is married to a, marginal Republican. They were having dinner with some friends recently who are strong Republicans, and this woman who is a donor of ours said $7.25 an hour for minimum wage. Our minimum wage is less than West Virginia. And the person she's talking to said, wait, how do you even know that? yay, represent. But no, that can't be true. And so she sent him some information that shows it's true and shows how hard it is to live on this, and shows that, oh, for 50% of the people on minimum wage are women, and shows that the average age of somebody who's on minimum wage job is over 30. And she got that all from Represent. And as you get that kind of information, share it with other people, but also help to find another donor. So when you send in your money after this call, or you send in your money because you haven't yet given this year, be sure and write a note to a friend. By the way, I just want you to know about Represent, and these are the issues they're fighting for. So our next steps, you heard it from Deb and Lissa. Let us not waste 2021. Let us not just sit back and ignore it. You know, one of the groups that's really working hard on this right now is Turn PA Blue. And Turn PA Blue is kind of a, you know, parallel organization in some ways to the State Democratic Party, but they're the group who are on the ground in so many places. Right now, they're working very hard on judicial races, and they're working on turnout. They've just taken on the responsibility for all issues around publicizing what vote by mail is, and following up on vote by mail, and calling people who have gotten ballots but haven't returned them yet. And Turn PA Blue is the real activist part of the state. And they're looking at how do they increase their reach by looking at local races and local controls right now. But they're also looking at setting up partnerships in 2021 for a better 2022. And that's why we stay in touch with them. We are raising money this year to support some special elections and early candidate visibility. It is so important. If listening tours are the right way to go, and I hope you're convinced after listening to this, to our two speakers today, how important it is to know what's going on in the district. They need money. You know, I think it's charming of them and lovely of them to go out and work hard, but money is needed for leave behind literature, to pay for campaign workers and all of those kind of things in 2021. We really believe in a reflective democracy. I made a note here that we've said many times that we've never had a person of color or a woman as governor or senator in this state. We're, you know, New York just now has its first woman governor, but we have never had one in Pennsylvania. We don't even have one declared as running for governor in 2022. And that's one of the, besides her incredible competence, that's one of the reasons we're supporting Dr. Valar Kush for Senate. But we also are talking about how, you know, what we should do about judicial races and whether we should mention those candidates, not to endorse them, just to remind you there's some really critical races coming up. There's some critical local races coming up in 2021. And we want to make sure that people are paying attention to the reflective democracy. And again, check out our website, volunteer with us, attend future briefings. I'm trying to schedule what we're doing in September to give some grand kickoffs to where we're going in the next year. So are there any questions from anybody else? Any final comments from Lissa or Deb or anybody else on the call?
I just want to say, Chris, Represent PA, you know, was so important, not just to me, but to other women candidates last year. And you know, without you, without Turn PA Blue, without Change PA, you know, it is, raising money is the very, very hardest part of the whole thing, because you're trying to run and at the same time you're trying to raise money, and you only have so much bandwidth as a person and so many hours in the day. And what you all are doing here is just, I can't tell you how much we appreciate it.
Yep. Totally echo that. I still remember the day. It was like late August 2020 when my campaign manager called, and I think it was right after, but like Represent, Change PA, maybe a couple other large institutional partners called with how much they were going to contribute to my race. And he said, "You don't have to do daily call time anymore." And I was like, I'm doing the doors. I'm going to talk to voters. And now I can take what I've learned from this deep listening tour to make those conversations even better when I run again, and to have the support of groups like Represent PA so that I can focus on those voter conversations, whether it's for me or any of the other fantastic women you all support. It's absolutely critical. So thank you for the work you do, and thank you to all the donors.
You know, one of the things that I learned in I think it was 2016, in one of the campaigns, we had taken and we divided up calls among several, you know, of the people who had been part of the endorsement process. And I called one woman and I said, "You're going to get $5,000 from us." And she said, "You're kidding, you're kidding." And then she paused and she said, "Am I really going to get it?" And I said, "Yeah, you're really going to get it. We just need to confirm your bank account information." And da-da-da. She goes, "You don't know how many people that I call on the phone who say they're going to send me money and never do." And I go, "Wait, what?" You know, I mean, just a lot of things like that. We like to be, you know, an honest donor to you. Anything else? Well, thank you very much to our speakers for today. Thanks for all you're doing. Representpa.org, go online to us, send us a check. We're working hard. These women are working hard. Our candidates are working hard. Everybody's waiting for those districts to come out, and we want to be ready to support them when they do. So thank you.